The man of mystery and lots of trade value is Alex Caruso. Lots of teams are almost knocking down the door for a chance at getting Caruso on their team. And we're going to talk about exactly what the Bulls want in return and a team that's kind of flew under the radar but has now come to the surface on trying to acquire him in a trade. I'm your host, Joey Mercer. This is another episode of Bulls Digest. And before we get into it there today, I just want to say that about 85% of you that watch these videos are not subscribed. So if you aren't already subscribed to the channel, make sure to go down below, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell for notifications, and every single time we upload, you will be notified so you can stay up to date with your Chicago Bulls and our takes on them. So without further ado, let's get into the topic at hand there today, and that is Caruso to net a big return. So that's not to say, of course, that Caruso is definitely going to net something massive, but it seems as if the Bulls are looking to get that if they are going to move him at all. If he is traded, it's going to be for something big. Now, what is big exactly? Well, a lot of that is being compared to the trade that the Toronto Raptors made recently involving OG Anunoby. When we look into this one, it actually came out from Bleacher Nation Bulls, and we can see there that says Alex Caruso trade rumors. Bulls want OG Anunoby type deal, and the Warriors have called. So when we look into this, it says the BleacherNation.com article and report, and that's the one we're going to be diving into and talking about a little bit there today to kind of get some insight on exactly what they have to say. They have some personal takes, and those are the ones I'd like to kind of add on to or give my own takes based on those to kind of reflect. When we look into this one, it says Alex Caruso is the belle of the ball. Easily the Chicago Bulls' best asset at the 2024 trade deadline, there has been no lack of interest in the defensive menace. And he probably is the guy with the most trade value. The contract's really great, just made an all-defensive team. Fits into a lot of systems. Although he can't create as much on offense, he can fit there where he can shoot so well this season. And obviously the defense, as I mentioned, he made an all-defensive team last year, has been absolutely stellar and is up there among the league's bigs when it comes to the advanced metrics, which is really tough to do for a guard, believe me. The next thing that we saw in this one was a handful of playoff teams have already reached out about acquiring the veteran, and the Bulls have reportedly answered those calls with an extremely steep asking price. Zach Lowe of ESPN reported last week that Chicago's front office could net as much as 2 first-round picks for Caruso's services due to the extreme interest. His colleague Adrian Wojnarowski echoed the sentiment on Monday, sharing that the Bulls believe they can even drum up the kind of return Toronto got for versatile wing OG Anunoby. If they're going to trade Alex Caruso, they want a lot for him, Wojnarowski said on the Woj Pod. Like an OG Anunoby type deal is what has been subscribed to me, and I think he fits anywhere, and there are no shortage of teams who would love to get Alex Caruso. And that's exactly the way that I feel about him as well. I really do think that he fits on every team in the league. As I mentioned, he can fit there right in the corner if you do knocking down those threes. He can make all the hustle plays, play all the defense you need, very switchable on defense, and it's a very hard player to find in this league. Next thing we saw in this one was the Raptors netted R.J. Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and a 2024 second-round pick from the Knicks for Anunoby. While this didn't include any first-round draft capital, Barrett and Quickley are 2 starting-caliber players who are under 24 years old. For a Raptors franchise looking to reset their timeline around Scotty Barnes, it felt like a high-level return. And I do agree. I mean, that trade, when it went down, I thought that was a great return for OG. I mean, you take on Quickley, who is almost a 6th Man of the Year candidate so far this season. And then you look at R.J. Barrett. He was playing phenomenal. Starting to really pick things up. If you look at the stats when he wasn't having to hoist things at the end of the shot clock, getting more touches, and he really does have the ability to develop into a solid player. So I thought the return for OG Anunoby on that was very solid for the Raptors and has helped out the Knicks very well. On the other side of the coin, for sure. Would Caruso get the same type of deal? Maybe not as much, but it could definitely be around that. We do still have to remember that OG Anunoby has not made any all-star teams, but he is a great defensive player in this league and can create a little bit more than Alex Caruso can offensively, so that's something to take into account as well. I think if a trade were to be done, it would almost be similar to one of those players. Now, similar to those players, obviously not those players, and a second-round pick, something like that would be more towards Caruso's value, in my opinion. Next thing that we saw in this was, at first glance, the Bulls asking for a package of this caliber seems idealistic. Anunoby is a far more proven two-way asset. He's averaged 16 points per game over the past 4 seasons on 47% shooting from the field and 38% shooting from long range. To be sure, Caruso has been one of the league's better three-point shooters this season at about 40.5%, so around a 41. But he doesn't possess the steady track record that Anunoby has, particularly when we consider the volume. The offensive upside with Anunoby is simply higher, and we have to factor this into the kind of return the Raptors received. Still, I'm not sure the gap between those two is as vast as some may think. Caruso has shown his increasingly ability to impact winning on both ends. He's a solid three-point shooter, a sneaky great offensive rebounder, and an elite defender. While Anunoby deserves his flowers for his defensive versatility, Caruso might have him beat on that side of the ball. Anunoby finished with an all-defensive second-team honor last season, while Caruso walked away with the first-team nod. Caruso's defensive estimated plus-minus has also sat a few notches higher than Anunoby the past couple of seasons per dunks and threes. So if you aren't familiar with dunks and threes, it's kind of tracking data similar to how Craft NBA does it, but it's more in a graph form, really analytic based, very tech-like if you're into that kind of thing. I definitely suggest checking it out. You do have to pay for a subscription to check it out, however, though, and the graphs do look very similar to Kirk Goldsberry. Kind of a similar theory, except it's a little bit more advanced than what Goldsberry puts out with some of his graphs. Not to say there's anything wrong with those, because I do think they're great, but something to check out. And like I said, Caruso's up there with the bigs in the league, advanced metric-wise on defense, and is better than Anunoby for sure in that measure. When we look at the next part of this, it says, with that in mind, I don't think asking for an Anunoby-type deal is as ridiculous as it sounds. Does that mean I think the Bulls will get it? No, but it is somewhat similar to demanding 2 lightly protected first-round picks. I can also understand why the Bulls would prefer young yet established NBA entities as opposed to draft wildcards. And, I mean, that's just the way that the front office looks like for the Bulls. They really don't like to take on draft picks as much. We haven't really drafted anybody very solid since Garpax when they drafted Kobe White, and that's just absolutely accurate. Nothing's really come up too much. Now, there hasn't been too much time for those players to develop, but there haven't been any right-away studs in their rookie season that we've gotten from Mark Eversley and Arturas Karnisovas, of course, but there's still hope that something can happen there with the drafts. Of course, we haven't had the best draft selections around either. It's not like they've been really top blue chipper picks, but at the same time, I really do think that this organization, the front office, has really, for as long as I can remember, really wanted to get NBA-ready players as opposed to the draft players coming in at all costs necessary. Now, when we look in the next part of this, it says, we all know they haven't had the best of luck in the draft in recent years, so getting a couple of players who can make an immediate impact helps them remain somewhat competitive while also taking a step back. Similar to what we've seen the Raptors do this year, the only difference is they at least have a potential star in Barnes on their hands. Again, I don't think they'll get the Anunoby return, but perhaps there is a middle ground that can be found over the next few days. Will they accept one asset with upside and a first-round pick? If so, there might be one trade partner that makes a lot of sense. And that leads us in the next part of this that I wanted to mention to you, and that is actually the Warriors calling about Caruso. NBC Sports Chicago's Casey Johnson reported this weekend that multiple front offices have gotten in touch with Bulls about Caruso, including one team desperate to stay relevant. League sources indicated that even before Lavine's surgery news had broken, multiple teams, including the Golden State Warriors, had inquired on Caruso. To this point, management largely had rebuffed interest in Caruso because an internal focus centered on chasing a playoff spot. The Warriors are 21-25 on the season and currently 12th in the Western Conference. If they want to have any chance at making real noise in the playoffs, they're likely going to have to make some big-time moves at this trade deadline. Adding Caruso would undoubtedly give their 22nd ranked defense a boost. Between Caruso's ability to blow up the point of attack and Green's ability to disrupt front courts, the Warriors would have one of the best defensive tandems in the NBA. And that's really hard to argue there for sure. I mean, you look at Green, a former depoy, and then Caruso coming off an all-defensive team last season. How are they not going to be phenomenal defense with two of those guys? One protecting the rim and the bigs, another guy protecting the wings and the guards. I think it's a really, really great fit there for sure on defense at the very least. When we look in the next part of this, it says, let's be clear, the Bulls aren't getting Jonathan Kuminga. While the lottery pick was seemingly on the market earlier this season, he recently played has surely taken him off the table. Golden State still has a couple of interesting youngsters, however, with Moses Moody, Tracy Jackson-Davis, and Brandon Podziemski. They would have to put one on the table for Caruso, with Moody and Podziemski presumably drawing the most interest from the Bulls. Throw in a late 2020s first rounder, and the Bulls may have found themselves a pretty solid deal. And I would have to agree there for sure. That's exactly the type of deal that I was talking about earlier in this video that I think that Caruso could net. And I think that Moody would be the player of choice if that were to happen. And we've talked about potential deals of him coming over to the Bulls for sure. And that's one that I think that could definitely happen if the Warriors are looking to make this next push for the playoffs. Last thing we saw on this was, regardless, I don't care who the Bulls discuss a Caruso deal with right now, as long as it means they're picking up the phone. He's the exact kind of player that an underachieving team has to consider trading. As much as that pains me to say when we consider how amazing Caruso is to watch, it's time to consider the long-term outlook of this franchise. And Caruso isn't getting any younger. He's about 30 years old right now, hovering right around that age. And that's not exactly a guy that you're going to see on this team in 5 years performing at the same level necessarily. It definitely happens in this league, but the chances of it happening are so slim that you'd rather a near guarantee than a gamble at that stage in his career when he's on such a good contract with such a high trade value. You need to strike while the iron's hot, get a good deal for him. If you're not going to make some noise in the playoffs this season, might as well deal him, get some value for him while you still can, and try to flip that into something that can help us in the future. So this has been another episode of Bulls Digest. I hope you all enjoyed there today. Make sure to go down below if you did. Hit that like button. Comment on the video. I'd like to hear from all of you. And as always, subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you all in the next one. Sign off.